Welcome to Watch Mojo, and today we're peeling back the chilling layers of some of your favorite movies and several of the most unsettling true crime tales out there. But we're starting with the shocking true story of the mob movie classic, Goodfellas.
Hi Mom, what do you think? Look at my shoes, aren't they great?
My God. You look like a gangster.
Welcome to Watch Mojo, and today we're looking at the shocking true story of Goodfellas.
You know, you're just funny. It's funny, you know, the way you tell the story and everything.
Funny how? I mean, what's funny about it?
For this video, we're pulling back the curtain of Martin Scorsese's 1990 mob movie. What are your thoughts on Goodfellas? At the beginning of the iconic film, Henry Hill famously claims that he always wanted to be a gangster.
As far back as I can remember, I always wanted to be a gangster.
But is that true? Well, yeah, pretty much. Hill was raised in Brooklyn, and his house was located across the street from a taxi dispatch. This cabbie was a popular sight for New York mobsters, including Paul Vario. Vario was a capo in the Lucchese crime family who used the cab stand as a front for his criminal exploits. A young Hill was drawn to the location and inquired about part-time work. And it was through this inquiry that he became acquainted with the mob.
He was in awe of Paulie's money and power. The gangster looked out for him and told anyone who asked that Henry was a relative. Of course, Henry was only half Sicilian.
He served drinks at card games and ran small errands, nothing too big or important.
Paul would ask him to steal certain things from the grocery store, including olive oil, which Henry would oblige him.
I mean, he was barely out of knee pants, and he began running errands for one of the strongest and biggest crews in New York in the Lucchese family, the Paul Vario.
But this changed when Hill was just 14. Then he started working as a loan shark for Vario and was given a no-show job in a bricklayers union. A favorite in the world of organized crime, a no-show job is when someone is placed on a payroll but not actually expected to show up, hence the name. They get all the rewards and enact none of the labor.
Henry didn't realize he was becoming involved in one of the New York Mafia's most violent crews.
At this point, Hill was fully ingrained in the mob. When a rival cab stand opened up across the street, he helped burn the cars. He got into stolen credit card scams. After a brief stint in the army, he started hijacking cars.
At 13, I was making more money than most of the grown-ups in the neighborhood. I mean, I had more money than I could spend. I had it all.
Unfortunately, this wasn't the career path that Hill's electrician father envisioned for his son, and it tore at the family fabric. His father knew the kind of work that was going on at the cab stand, and he wanted no part of it. In fact, according to Hill's sister, Lucille Crisafulli, her father refused any gift that was given to him by Hill, assuming that it was paid for with blood money.
My father didn't want any part of his money, never took a penny from him, never would take a gift from. My father wouldn't open a gift if Henry gave it to him.
It was during this time that Hill met all the big players in the story. Aside from Paul Vario, Hill became acquainted with James Burke, a fellow mobster in the Lucchese crime family.
He was a maniac. He was a maniac. And people knew that they couldn't cross that line with him. You crossed that line with him, you were dead. And you didn't get a second chance.
There was Karen Friedman, whom Hill dated and wooed with lavish trips to the Copacabana nightclub. They would eventually marry and have 2 children, 1 son and 1 daughter, not 2 daughters as portrayed in the movie.
She didn't know what I did in the beginning. You know, she knew that, you know, I kind of, you know, I thought I was a union delegate, you know. And she was apart from that world that I was in with.
And of course, there was Thomas DeSimone, a notoriously violent gangster and the subject of Joe Pesci's Oscar-winning performance.
What the are you looking at? You moron. You don't want to bring the chick, right?
Unlike in the film, DeSimone and Hill did not grow up together. Rather, Hill was already in his early 20s when he met the 15-year-old DeSimone, and he worked directly under Hill in his various mob operations.
Henry Hill was peaceful, would avoid violence. Tommy DeSimone would embrace violence.
One of their biggest was the robbery of the Air France cargo terminal at JFK. According to insider Robert McMahon, a large sum of cash was being held inside the terminal, and the mob could simply stroll in and get it.
Henry and Jimmy would come together on a given day, every day. What's the plan? Where's the action? Where's the score? Can we make a score today?
So that's pretty much exactly what they did. In the movie, McMahon personally hands them the keys to the vault.
Air France made me. We walked out with $420,000 without using a gun, and we did the right thing. We gave Paulie his tribute.
In real life, the gangsters lifted the keys from a drunk security guard. They then walked into the terminal, loaded 7 bags of money into a large briefcase, and strolled right out.
Air France was the first major cash haul. They pulled that off very intelligently, and it was left as a mystery.
All told, they literally walked away with $420,000, around $3.5 million in 2021 dollars.
That is a lot of money for a kid like you, all right? Anybody asks you where you got it in Vegas playing craps, all right?
It was shortly after this that Hill participated in the famous killing of William Bentvena, playfully known as Billy Bats.
Hey, Tommy, all dressed up, all grown up and doing the town. Look at this.
Bentvena was released from prison and insulted Tommy DeSimone at his welcome home party.
Now go home and get your fucking shine box.
Motherfucking you fucking piece of
DeSimone, Hill, and James Burke later killed Bentvena for the slight, and it went down pretty much exactly as it does in Goodfellas. Yes, that includes the vicious beating, stopping at DeSimone's mother's house, killing Bentvena after realizing that he was still alive, and burying him upstate.
We had a serious problem with Billy Bats. This was really a touchy thing.
The only difference is the planning of Bentvena's death. In the film, it's portrayed as more of a reactionary outburst from Tommy. In real life, the killing was meticulously planned. Not only did it come 2 weeks after the initial insult against Tommy, but it was also partly orchestrated by Jimmy Burke, who feared that Bentvena would take over his loan shark operation.
Billy Bats had just come home from prison. He had all the Sherlock business there, the bookmaking business. And Jimmy, you know, when he was away, Jimmy took it all over, basically. And Jimmy knew he had to kill him eventually.
After a 4-year stint in prison for assaulting a man named Gaspar Chacho, Hill entered his most prosperous era. Going against strict rules of the Lucchese crime family, Hill and Burke started trafficking drugs, including cocaine and quaaludes.
It was too easy, you know what I mean?
Henry was now concealing his part in Billy Bat's death and his drug dealing from his mob bosses, and he was getting hooked on the drugs he was secretly selling.
The operation, while frowned upon by the higher-ups, made Hill extraordinarily wealthy. It was around this time, on December 11th, 1978, that the family enacted the famous Lufthansa heist. Like Air France before it, this one also occurred at John F. Kennedy International Airport. Jimmy Burke organized the robbery, and Lucchese associates walked away with $5 million in stolen currency, making it the largest cash robbery in American history.
I mean, there wasn't a wise guy that didn't know that we didn't do it. You know what I mean? And the feds knew it too.
However, Burke grew incredibly paranoid about being implicated in the heist, and he had 9 associates killed to ensure their silence.
Anybody who had information or anybody who wasn't trusted was executed. So that kind of dried up our witness pool because the people we wanted to talk to and get to cooperate were dead.
The heist was a major turning point for the Lucchese family, and with it, everything started to fall apart.
What did I tell you before? I talked to you before, didn't I? Didn't I say what was going on? Didn't I say not to go buy anything for a while?
Burke didn't trust anyone and was killing people left and right. Tommy DeSimone went missing about a month after the heist, and it's widely believed that he was whacked in retaliation for the killing of William Bentvena.
In that world, you know, the rules that they follow, he sort of got what he deserved.
And Hill was going down for his drug empire. One of Hill's smugglers went to the authorities and told them all about Hill's operation and mafia connections. He was finally arrested in 1980, and this event was the main catalyst for the downfall of the Lucchese crime family.
He got caught. He got caught. The guy who thought he would never get caught, they'll get you.
Following his arrest, Hill grew unbearably paranoid. Many people around him were being killed, and Hill was afraid that he was going to be another body in the pile. Not only had he been arrested, but he was also addicted to drugs and could be implicated in the Lufthansa robbery.
You remember the scene from Scarface? Al Pacino's going like this with all of the coke? That was Henry. At that stage of his life, he couldn't get enough of it.
According to Hill, he was going to be one more victim of the relentless Jimmy Burke.
Henry knew Jimmy was extremely paranoid. He also knew that he killed everybody involved in the Lufthansa heist. Henry also heard the wiretaps of Jimmy planning to kill him. Had Vario sanctioned a hit? Henry, too, joined the paranoia club.
In the end, Hill wasn't killed but arrested as a material witness. With the prospect of a lengthy prison sentence and his paranoia getting the best of him, Hill decided to finally turn against the mob and act as an informant.
He knew that life was spiraling out of control. There was no way to turn. He hit a brick wall.
He entered witness protection while 50 associates were arrested and convicted on his information. Of those arrested were Hill's longtime associates, Jimmy Burke and Paul Vario, the same man who introduced Hill to the life of crime back when he was a teenager.
I beat them to the punch. You know what I mean? I did.
Burke had issued a multi-million-dollar contract on Henry Hill's life.
Goodfellas doesn't go into much detail regarding Hill's post-mob life, but that alone deserves its own film.
Right after I got here, I ordered some spaghetti with marinara sauce, and I got egg noodles and ketchup. I'm an average nobody. Get to live the rest of my life like a schnook.
Hill, living as Martin Lewis, met a woman named Sherry Anders and married her despite already being married to Karen Friedman.
He said not to worry. I married her under my new name. So therefore, I'm not committing bigamy.
It was a drunken fling.
This was likely a major factor in Friedman filing for divorce in 1990. Hill continued to traffic drugs while in the program, and he was convicted of the crime in 1987. As punishment, Hill was kicked out of witness protection.
Finally, they just pulled the plug and they said, look, this guy is not somebody who is dependable in any way. He's reckless in his behavior, and we're not going to keep him in the protection in the program anymore.
He would battle substance abuse throughout the rest of his life and faced numerous arrests for drug possession and public intoxication. Hill died of heart disease just one day after his 69th birthday on June 12, 2012. He was the last of the so-called Goodfellas.
Henry died in his bed the night after a great birthday party. Is an extraordinary, successful life for a man that was Henry Hill.
Paul Vario passed away from lung failure in 1988, and Jimmy Burke died of cancer in 1996 at the age of 64.
When it comes to horror movies, adding the words based on a true story to the movie's description is a surefire way to elevate frights to max levels. Well, here now is a look at the fascinating and yes, shocking true story of the Pope's Exorcist.
On the night of June 4th, you performed an exorcism.
Welcome to Watch Mojo, and today we're recounting the shocking true story of the Pope's Exorcist.
In this film, I play a real man, Father Gabriele Amorth.
I am the chief exorcist of the Vatican.
For this video, we're examining the life and exploits of Father Gabriele Amorth, the Catholic priest who served as an exorcist for the Diocese of Rome, and has since become the focus for the horror film The Pope's Exorcist. Inspiration.
My position was appointed by the Pope.
The Pope's Exorcist, starring Russell Crowe, is based on two memoirs of Amorth's. An exorcist tells his story and An Exorcist More Stories, both of which were published around the turn of the millennium. All told, though, Amorth published more than 30 books, most of them in Italian, with some even being released after his passing in 2016. Those that don't center around his personal experiences during his time as an exorcist covered demonology or Catholicism in some fashion.
He performed thousands of exorcisms and had not only done it for 36 years, but had documented the things that he'd experienced.
Perhaps the most striking detail about his long career is that he claimed in 2013 to have performed as many as 160,000 exorcisms, which is obviously impossible, right? Well, not so fast. Early life. Gabriele Amorth was born in Italy in 1925, the youngest of 5 sons. As passionate and vocal as Amorth would become about his spirituality, it wasn't the cloth that immediately drew his attention.
At the age of 18, Gabriele Amorth fought his first battle against evil when he joined the Italian resistance against the fascist dictator Mussolini and the Nazi alliance. He was awarded the Medal of Liberation by the Italian government.
Of course, the advent of World War II became an unavoidable reality during his adolescence. As a teenager, he served in the Italian resistance and was even given a medal for bravery. After the war, Amorth followed in his father's footsteps and became a lawyer, even at one point working for future Italian Prime Minister Giulio Andreotti. It wasn't until the 1950s that Amorth began pursuing a holy existence.
It's a very dark pursuit, and his faith gave him a certain level of courage to do the job.
The definition of exorcism.
It was 10 years later, before he found his calling and was ordained a priest in the Society of St. Paul.
Amort became ordained as a Roman Catholic priest in 1954 at the age of 29. Even given that he lived to be 91, one would assume that he would have had to have gotten started as an exorcist at a young age in order to perform so many exorcisms. But Amort wasn't appointed the position of chief exorcist for the Roman diocese until 1986, at which point he was already 61. So what's the catch? How exactly did Amort conduct such an astonishing amount of exorcisms? Well, it all comes down to what one considers an exorcism.
That was not an exorcism.
Specifically, Amort counted his dealings as exorcisms whether they lasted minutes or hours. He also counted those individuals who merely needed a simple prayer recited or an entire ritual.
You've been played. You took the bait.
While most of his exorcisms reportedly didn't involve full-on possession, there were also those who were said to be taken by more than one entity, sometimes thousands, requiring multiple exorcisms.
He has exorcised Christina 8 times without success. This will be her 9th.
Under this loose criteria, you can see how even Amort himself didn't have an exact figure, or how his final estimation could be so high. All that being said, even some of Amort's critics have recognized his dedication to the practice.
We have more questions for you, Father Amort.
Even by minimizing the nature of the average exorcism, the numbers still suggest that Amort's dealings were virtually never-ending and consistent. Still, it wasn't as if Amort was over-eager to perform exorcisms. While there's always been something of a schism between spirituality and psychology, Amort recognized the value of seeking out comprehensive medical care first. He denied taking on any case based simply on a patient's personal claims, and always directed them to a doctor whenever he felt his services were not required.
Majority of cases do not require an exorcism.
98% are recommended by him to doctors and psychiatrists.
The other 2%, I call it evil.
As for how many genuine cases of possession he came across, Amort estimated around 100, which, if we're being honest, still sounds daunting for even the most experienced exorcist.
If evil does not exist, what then is the role of the church?
Writes,
he performed his first exorcisms at the Cathedral of St. John Lateran, at the complex known as the Church of the Holy Staircase.
A member of the Society of St. Paul, Amort used its headquarters as his primary location for exorcisms. He typically had his patients sit in a velvet armchair, but those more prone to violence had to be strapped down on a nearby bed. It's also for this reason that Amort never practiced his exorcisms alone, often bringing assistant exorcists and family members to help wherever needed. Typical Christian iconography lined the walls, such as crucifixes and photos of religious figures. In particular, Amort liked to have one up of Pope John Paul II, who served for much of Amort's time as exorcist, as this one reportedly made the demons, quote, particularly irritable.
You have a problem with me? You talk to my boss, the Pope.
To that effect, Amort was said to be eager to get under the skin of his demonic adversaries.
Whatever you do, you only do because God allows it.
Unlike most exorcists, Amort liked to use humor as a tactic, beginning each ritual by thumbing his nose at the entity. He was known to talk back to the demons, his flippancy serving to undermine their power and influence. One of his favorite jokes to say went along the lines of, "You know why the devil flees when he sees me? Because I'm uglier than he is."
Did he allow that?
Additional beliefs.
My faith does not require defense.
As progressive as Amort was on the subject of science, he was less so towards other influences. He believed certain practices like yoga were satanic due to its association with Hinduism. Not only that, but he believed that yoga specifically led to other evil practices like reading Harry Potter.
That's it, Harry. There is no good and evil. There is only power, and those too weak to seek it. Together, we'll do extraordinary things. Just give me the stone.
You liar!
Kill him!
If Amort's exorcism estimates are to be believed, it's clear that the man was regularly exposed to more evil than any one person experiences in their whole lifetime. As such, he was able to distill his reservations with modern attitudes with this quote: "People have lost the faith, and superstition, magic, Satanism, or Ouija boards have taken its place, which then open all the doors to the presence of demons."
You really don't want me to play, huh?
No, I do. Captain Howdy said no.
Captain who?
Captain Howdy.
Who's Captain Howdy?
You know, I make the questions and he does the answers.
Oh, Captain Howdy, I see.
Nice.
Legacy.
The church has fought against this demon before. The Vatican covered it up. We need to find out why.
While the Pope's Exorcist film seems to be a largely sensationalized take on Amorth's experiences, it's clear that he's left behind a sizable legacy in the field of exorcism. For one thing, he co-founded the International Association of Exorcists in 1990, which came to consist of over 200 members by the year 2000. This was a significant step forward for Amorth, who believed that exorcists were in short supply, whereas cases of possession were only on the rise. In 2016, mere months before Amorth's death, William Friedkin, director of the original Exorcist film, was granted access to Amorth's practices.
Father Amorth, in his first memoir, wrote about the Exorcist film, and he said it was his favorite movie, I guess, of course. He said that the special effects were a little over the top, but he said that it helped people to understand his work. And so, when I wrote asking if I could meet with him, he immediately agreed.
It resulted in the first ever of Amorth's exorcisms to be captured on camera, that of a woman who was supposedly cursed by her satanic brother and his girlfriend. Friedkin himself called the experience, quote, terrifying, and the ensuing footage became part of the 2017 documentary, The Devil and Father Amorth.
He was the most spiritual man I ever met. Like everyone who knew him, I'll never forget him. He enriched my life. But what about Christina?
While the documentary itself wasn't particularly well received, it's evident that Amorth's life has captured the attention of the global zeitgeist all the same. If there's any one thing that he wanted to caution people against, it was the presence and influence of the devil, which Amorth maintained wants nothing more than to have people believe he doesn't exist.
Imagine what could happen if the devil possessed the soul of the Pope's exorcist. Who will defend you?
My faith does not require defense.
Okay, we can't talk about movies about exorcism without, talking about the movie The Exorcist. But what in that film is fact and what's fiction? Well, here now is the shocking truth.
I'm Damien Karras. And I'm the devil. Now kindly undo these straps.
Welcome to WatchMojo, and today we're looking at interesting facts about the true story that were altered for The Exorcist's concept, setting, and plot.
What really happened to the haunted boy in St. Louis and the devil that possessed him?
The victims.
Did you ever see The Exorcist?
Yeah.
The real case started right here. The fire department actually burned down the house themselves. The authorities referred to the boy as Robbie Doe.
As everyone knows by now, The Exorcist centers around a 12-year-old girl named Regan McNeil, who is possessed by the demon Pazuzu, or, as Regan herself calls it, Captain Howdy.
Who's Captain Howdy?
You know, I make the questions and he does the answers.
This is a slight deviation from the historic tale. The real case involved a 14-year-old boy who's known by the pseudonyms Robbie Mannheim, or more popularly, Roland Doe.
A lot of his former friends, people he knew growing up, always described him as being sort of hyper, sort of troublesome. It wasn't that he was a bad student, he just had a lot of trouble focusing.
The boy's identity remained a mystery for over 70 years, until both the Skeptical Inquirer and The Guardian revealed in 2021 that he was likely one Ronald Edwin Hunkler.
While the final report of the exorcism remains locked away in the Roman Catholic archives, stories eventually leaked to the press, and reported details about the boy's life after the exorcisms are revealed.
The setting. the primary location was also changed, with author and screenwriter William Peter Blatty bringing the action into what was then the modern year.
Well, in 1949, I believe I was a junior at Georgetown University. And in class, I heard some details about a so-called case of possession and an exorcism that was going on somewhere nearby.
The year is never explicitly mentioned in either the novel or the film, but the former was published in 1971 and the film was released in 1973. Therefore, we can infer that the story takes place in the early 1970s. However, the location is explicitly given in both, and that is the historic neighborhood of Georgetown, Washington, D.C.
Oh, Mom, can't we get a horse?
Well, now, we're in Washington, honey.
I know.
But the exorcism of Roland Doe occurred in the late 1940s and took place primarily in St. Louis, Missouri. That said, one of Doe's exorcisms occurred at Georgetown University Hospital, which could be the location of Reagan's medical tests.
Dr. Tanny says the x-rays are negative. In other words, normal.
The number of priests.
The power of Christ compels you! The power of Christ compels you!
2 priests perform the climactic exorcism, Father Damien Karras, the protagonist of the film, and the older Father Lancaster Marin. By only having 2 priests, Blatty streamlines the exorcism process and allows us to connect with the characters on a deeper, more personal level.
I think the point is to make us despair. To see ourselves as animal and ugly.
In reality, the exorcism of Roland Doe was performed by several different priests.
He said that this was getting beyond what he could deal with. There was a Lutheran minister. He suggested that the family take him to see a Catholic priest because they know more about these things and more about possessions.
The one conducted at Georgetown University Hospital was performed by a priest named Edward Hughes. And in St. Louis, Doe was seen to by both Raymond Bishop and William Bowdern. These 2 priests were assisted by another pair, Walter Halloran and William Van Roo. All told, 5 different priests performed the exorcism of Roland Doe. The number of exorcisms. Talk about streamlining a process.
What an excellent day for an exorcism. You'd like that? Intensely.
While Karras examines Reagan throughout The Exorcist's 3rd act, there's just one primary exorcism, and it occurs in the climax of the film. This was obviously done for dramatic purposes, as the possession would lose its impact if it was seen too often.
Timmy, why you do this to me? Please, Timmy, I'm afraid.
In real life, Doe was subjected to at least 3 different exorcisms. There was the aforementioned one performed in Georgetown, and at least 2 more followed in St. Louis. The first St. Louis exorcism was performed exclusively by Bishop and Bowdern, and it wasn't until the 3rd that assistants Halloran and Van Roo became involved.
According to the Exorcist diary, as Father Bowdern recites the prayers in Latin, the priests shriek with horror.
The number of demons. The Exorcist takes a major deviation from its real-life source, and that's in the number of demons involved.
Is there someone inside you?
Sometimes.
Who is it?
I don't know.
Thanks to various clues, it's strongly hinted that the demon possessing Reagan is Pazuzu, a real figure in ancient Mesopotamian religion. However, Pazuzu's involvement is never made explicit in either the novel or the film. Regardless, there is definitely just one demon possessing Reagan.
I think it might be helpful if I gave you some background on the different personalities Reagan has manifested. So far, I'd say there seem to be 3. She's convinced that
There's only one.
And while The Exorcist carried over many details from Doe's possession, there is one thing that was not included, and that was the letter X being scratched into Doe's stomach. The priests performing the exorcism interpreted this to mean there were 10 different demons inhabiting Doe.
Also on the back, I believe, were the words spite and hell.
The demon using weapons.
Keep away! The soul is mine!
The Exorcist takes another major deviation from the source, and that's in the demon's use of weapons. In The Exorcist, Pazuzu prefers to wage psychological warfare, often taunting Karras with his dead mother.
Your mother's in here with us, Karras. Would you like to leave a message? I see that she gets it.
it doesn't often revert to physical violence, as its hands are tied to the bed throughout the majority of the exorcism. This is in stark contrast to the demons allegedly inhabiting Doe, who physically assaulted Edward Hughes during his exorcism in Georgetown. Doe reportedly broke free from his restraints and grabbed a piece of the bed spring to use as a weapon. He then used the sharp bed spring to cut Hughes's arm.
People who knew Father Hughes said that he was never the same after this and that he had a problem with his arm.
It was a temporary victory, as Hughes ended the exorcism and Doe was moved to St. Louis. The use of hospitals. Medical institutions are curiously absent throughout much of The Exorcist. In fact, one of the extended sequences in which Regan undergoes various medical tests was excluded from the theatrical release and can only be seen in the director's cut.
Very good. That wasn't so bad, was it?
Nope. Most of the action and the entire exorcism is performed in Regan's Georgetown home.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and the Holy Spirit, by this sign of the Holy Cross of our Lord Jesus Christ, who lives and reigns with the Father and the Holy Spirit. Damien!
Amen.
This is in stark contrast to the story of Roland Doe. As previously mentioned, the first exorcism was performed by Edward Hughes at Georgetown University Hospital. After Doe was moved to St. Louis, additional exorcisms were performed by the aforementioned priests at the city's Alexian Brothers Hospital.
The Alexian Brothers Hospital had a secure psychiatric facility where Roland could be taken out of the public eye and everything would be kept secret because the Alexian Brothers were known for their secrecy.
It's unclear why Blatty moved the location, but it's likely owing to the more intimate setting of the bedroom. Witnesses.
Look, I'm only against the possibility of doing your daughter more harm than good.
Nothing you could do could make it any worse.
I can't do it. I need evidence that the church would accept his signs of possession.
When it comes to a supernatural story such as this, it's important to have witnesses. Otherwise, it becomes a mere case of, you'll have to take my word for it, and that's never satisfying. When it comes to The Exorcist, there are very few witnesses. A number of characters know that Regan is having problems, but in regards to the exorcism itself, there are only 3 witnesses: Regan, Karis, and Marin. Unfortunately, 2 of them die and the third doesn't remember the experience. So basically, no witnesses.
She doesn't remember any of it.
That's good.
The same cannot be said for Roland Doe. While the veracity of this is certainly under question, it's been reported that 48 people witnessed his numerous exorcisms.
Now, that's not a signing off saying, absolutely, I know with 100% this was a case of demonic possession, but we saw some really weird stuff that happened around this kid that we don't know how to explain naturally.
Despite the church's conclusion, the priests who were there believe Roland Doe was an undisputed case of demonic possession.
Surviving exorcists. The film has a rather bittersweet ending. Young Regan is saved, but at the cost of 2 priests who perform her exorcism.
You son of a bitch!
Marin dies during the battle, presumably from his heart condition. And in the famous climax of the film, Karis asks the demon to enter his body before throwing himself out the window. It undoubtedly makes for great drama, but nothing of the sort happened in real life. All of the exorcists survived and lived long lives. The earliest death was that of Raymond Bishop, who died in 1978, roughly 30 years after the exorcism occurred. He was 72.
And it turned out that it had been a copy of Father Bishop's diary of the exorcism, and that's how the story eventually became public. That's how we have access to the diary now.
Hughes was 62, Halloran 83, Bowdern 86, and Van Roo 89. Halloran was the last priest to die, having passed away in 2005. The veracity of the possession. And here we come to the big question. Was the possession actually real? When it comes to the film, there's no ambiguity at all. The possession, the demon, and the exorcism were all real. Obviously, the case is not so cut and dry when it comes to Roland Doe. Some religious experts, including Professors Terry Cooper and Cindy Epperson, still posit that the possession was real. However, it is now the common opinion that Roland Doe was merely a troubled boy and that nothing supernatural had occurred.
Do you choose to believe that this was something that was real and that happened as it's reported? Do you choose to remain skeptical? It boils down to, do you trust the veracity of the witnesses?
I have doubts about parts of the story, but I do think something happened. Whether you want to believe it was a demon or some sort of presence or some sort of psychological problem that was instantly cured somehow, whatever it was expelled.
Even worse, various authors and historians have poked holes in some of the events. For example, Mark Upsosnik proved that there is no evidence of Father Hughes performing an exorcism at Georgetown University Hospital.
Whether you want to believe it was a demon or some sort of presence or some sort of psychological problem that was instantly cured somehow, whatever it was expelled.
While the final report of the exorcism remains locked away in the Roman Catholic archives, stories eventually leaked to the press, and reported details about the boy's life after the exorcisms are revealed.
Did you know The Exorcist was based on a true account?
The exorcism of Roland Doe endures as a haunting warning. Evil walks among us, and the devil's greatest trick is making us believe he doesn't exist.
Okay, well, our next shocking real-life tale revolves around the bloodline of professional wrestlers and a supposed family curse. Yep, here now is the shocking story of the Von Erich dynasty.
The Von Erich family ascended to wrestling superstardom, but just as quickly suffered relentless personal tragedy.
Welcome to Watch Mojo, and today we're discussing the shocking true story of the Von Erich curse.
It's the only thing that matters to me.
The 2023 film The Iron Claw dramatized the lives and careers of the Von Erich family, a name synonymous with professional wrestling in the 1970s and 80s. However, is there any basis to the conjecture that this first family of Texas wrestling was cursed?
People said my family was cursed.
The short answer to our first question is no, at least according to the real-life Kevin Von Erich.
What happened is just terrible, just a terrible thing, but no curse.
The last surviving Von Erich brother told Vice as much during his appearance on the Season 1 episode of Dark Side of the Ring, titled, tellingly, The Last of the Von Erichs. However, this hasn't stopped many wrestling fans and journalists from musing about how so much misfortune and personal tragedy can afflict one family line so deeply, from a father to his sons.
It was a dynasty. It was a family dynasty.
Zac Efron's portrayal of Kevin in The Iron Claw presents a Von Erich who lends more weight to the apparent curse that seemed to follow his family since the days his father, Jack Adkisson, changed his name to Fritz Von Erich. The elder Adkisson portrayed a heel, or bad guy, during his wrestling heyday in the 1950s and 60s. The name Fritz Von Erich was actually given to Jack by the patriarch of another famous wrestling family, the Harts. Specifically, it was Stu Hart who paired Jack as Fritz alongside wrestler Walter Sieber, dubbed Waldo, as the fictional villainous German Von Erich brothers.
He could create a lot of heat just coming across as the German hit the ring and was going to beat up all the Americans.
Fritz Von Erich and his kayfabe, aka storyline brother Waldo, were billed as German nationals with sympathies to that country's historical connections to World War II. Thus, Fritz became a feared heel in Stu Hart's Canadian territory of Stampede Wrestling, then known as Klondike Wrestling. It was the relatively early days of his career when Fritz would develop his feared Iron Claw finishing maneuver.
Oh, did you see Fritz Von Erich, and the master of the Iron Claw, catches Joe Blanchard coming off the rope and is applying the Iron Claw to him right now.
Described simply, it was when he would grasp his opponent's head in a vice-like grip and squeeze until his foe succumbed to the pressure.
After years and years of doing the claw, you get scary, crazy good at it.
The Iron Claw was passed down by Fritz to his sons, as they too entered the wrestling business. The powerhouse trio of Kevin, Kerry, and David Von Erich were the first to achieve stardom, but they and the rest of the family were already no strangers to tragedy. The Iron Claw also touches upon the story of their older brother Jack Adkisson Jr., who passed away following an accidental electrocution in 1959.
They were all crying, and Jackie had been electrocuted.
It was the loss of Jack Jr. that in part helped push Fritz to slow down his in-ring career in order to focus on promotion. This would enable the Von Erichs to establish roots, buy a home, and hopefully become more financially stable. It would be in world-class championship wrestling where the Von Erichs' legacy as the first family of Texas wrestling would be forged. The company was founded by Ed McLemore in 1966, but was run and operated by Fritz until he passed WCCW to his sons Kevin and Kerry in 1988. This was during an age when professional wrestling was largely split into state-run territories that worked under the larger banner of the National Wrestling Alliance, aka the NWA. The vagabond life of a traveling wrestler may have been over for Fritz, but WCCW's television deal with ESPN, as well as its array of impressive talent, enabled his sons to become stars. Kevin, Kerry, and David Von Erich became household names in Texas, gaining the love and respect of their fans while becoming celebrities in the process. Fritz's children worked as babyfaces or good guys, and exemplified the Von Erich family's cultivated public persona of virtuous, God-fearing Texans who fought for the straight and narrow.
Coming off the ropes, up and over, rolls him up, this may be it!
In-ring battles with high-profile names like Bruiser Brody, Gentleman Chris Adams, Abdullah the Butcher, and particularly the Fabulous Freebirds made the three Von Erich sons some of the most popular professional wrestlers, full stop.
It will be David and Kevin both who come in, and they're going to have a triple truck, a flying drop kick.
However, the path of a professional wrestler at that time historically necessitated at least one trip to Japan. It was here where one's mettle as a superstar could be tested, new goals achieved, and new legacies forged for that country's rabid pro wrestling faithful. Unfortunately, the journey east would prove fatal for David Von Erich, who died at only 25 years of age while working there in 1984.
This voice says, David Manning, Joe Higuchi, All Japan Pro Wrestling. David Von Erich dead.
The official cause of death provided by the U.S. Embassy in Japan was labeled as acute enteritis, resulting in a ruptured appendix. Other theories abound, however, including one by Ric Flair that alleges his overuse of painkillers. Another, backed by both Kevin Von Erich and family friend David Manning, surmises that it was perhaps a heart attack that felled the Yellow Rose of Texas.
Texas got hurt that day.
The story of the Von Erich family doesn't get any easier at this point, because no fewer than 3 other of Fritz's sons would die by their own hand in the following years. The first would be Mike Von Erich, who was thrust into the pro wrestling spotlight as a replacement for David. The Iron Claw highlights the younger Von Erich's preferential desire to work behind the scenes in WCCW as opposed to in the ring. The film also leans into Mike's interest in music and songwriting. Yet Mike Von Erich debuted in 1983 for WCCW, and even embarked upon a semi-successful tour of Japan in 1987 near the end of his career.
Flying body slam. 1, 2, 3, and Mike Von Erich wins.
Prior to this, a 1985 trip to Tel Aviv, Israel would result in an in-ring shoulder injury.
Only a year after David's death, Mike dislocates his shoulder in the ring.
The surgery to repair this injury took a turn for the worse, and Mike suffered toxic shock syndrome as well as some brain damage. He did return to the ring, however, a feat not showcased in the Iron Claw. Still, the shadow of David Von Erich loomed large over Mike's career, and a number of personal setbacks, including a car accident and an arrest for DUI, pushed the young man to a dark place in the spring of 1987.
The Von Erich family attorney assisted Mike during his release from jail. He would be the last person to see him alive.
Mike Von Erich was only 23 when he intentionally mixed a combination of alcohol and an excess amount of Placidil, a sleeping medication.
Everybody was just so sad. It'd be Dave and now Mike.
Chris Von Erich was even younger than Mike, just 21, when he tragically took his own life on September 12, 1991. The smallest Von Erich brother had followed a similar path to his brother Mike, although, by all accounts, Chris Von Erich did harbor a deep desire to become a professional wrestler. Unfortunately, the young man's asthma and comparatively diminutive stature made acclimating to wrestling difficult.
He had brittle bones because of the asthma medication that he took.
The portrayal of Mike Von Erich in The Iron Claw seems to be an amalgamation of both brothers, since a training sequence underlines the younger Von Erich's struggles during training. Chris Von Erich's in-ring career lasted barely a year before his struggles with depression became fatal. If Mike and Chris struggle to find their footing in professional wrestling, then it's perhaps Kerry Von Erich that saw the highest profile and the most success. A one-time Olympic hopeful, Carey would see his career blossom into a tenure in the WWF after leaving his father's company in 1990.
Wow, right into the head, stunned the Conquistador, there it is, that spinning hammer move. It's all over but the shouting brain. Champion!
Carey's time working for Vince McMahon would be short-lived, however. And it was during this time when the struggles of Von Erich's personal life, including arrests, a divorce, and substance use, would eventually come to a head. Amazingly, Carey was still able to wrestle at this elite level, despite enduring a 1986 motorcycle accident that resulted in the amputation of his foot.
When they made the decision to amputate, I would have never, ever thought it could be kept secret.
Still, Carey Von Erich's frustration with his career setbacks and personal challenges proved to be too much for the young man to bear. Carey Von Erich died on February 18, 1993. Industry folks such as Bret Hart claim to have had conversations with Carey, where Von Erich expressed admiration for the self-destructive actions of his brothers, and expressed a desire to follow down their path.
Dad found him and he said he'd never seen such a peaceful look on Carey's face.
Kevin Von Erich echoed these sentiments during his appearance on Dark Side of the Ring, even mentioning how his father Fritz once threatened to do the same. Kevin tells the story of an armed Fritz, then suffering from severe brain and lung cancer, admonishing his son for not having, quote, the guts to follow in his brother's footsteps. Fritz Von Erich would eventually succumb to his cancer on September 10, 1997. Kevin, meanwhile, is the last surviving original Von Erich. The pro wrestling legend credits family with keeping him grounded amidst that industry's often tumultuous world. The image presented during his Dark Side of the Ring appearance paints a portrait of a grateful man who doesn't take his success for granted.
I'm lucky in a way that I found that the only thing that lasts is family.
The relationship between Fritz and his sons is also not painted with as many heavy, dramatic strokes as in the Iron Claw. Kevin, by all accounts, paints Fritz Von Erich as a man haunted by the death of his firstborn, Jack Jr.
He had seen him suffer too much. What a good man he was.
Fritz, according to Kevin, was a man who, quote, was at war with the world and in deep personal pain. Unfortunately, there's no way to go back and paint the Von Erich story with any colorful brushes. We need to look at the present and perhaps the future to see how Kevin's connection to religion and family have borne fruit and brought peace. Kevin's sons entered the business and currently wrestle under the names Ross and Marshall Von Erich. Carey Von Erich's daughter Lacey also wrestled for the WWE and TNA until retiring in 2010. So is the Von Erich family cursed? No, but their legacy within the professional wrestling industry is one of public success and private pain. It's a bittersweet tragedy that's gone on to both inspire others in its wake, while also serving as a cautionary tale for surviving professional wrestling's one-of-a-kind way of life.
Hey, who knows? Maybe the story will continue.
Okay, get ready because this next story is guaranteed to shock. That's because it revolves around the so-called Mormon Manson.
They were just brainwashed. And when you take away that brainwashing, we were always good people.
Welcome to Watch Mojo, and today we're delving into the complexities of the notorious Ervil LeBaron's life, tracing his early years, the formation of the infamous LeBaron Group, and the disturbing legacy he left behind.
Ervil is as dangerous as any man alive and won't stop until he wipes out all rival polygamists.
Ervil Morel LeBaron, born on February 22, 1925 in Chihuahua, Mexico, is a sinister figure in the realm of religious extremism. His life's narrative is a chilling exploration of the dark side of charismatic leadership, twisted religious doctrines, and the violent consequences that ensued. Early life and influences. Ervil LeBaron's journey into religious fanaticism can be traced back to his early life within a polygamous Mormon family. Raised by Alma Dayer LeBaron, a fervent believer in the principles of Mormon fundamentalism, Ervil was immersed in a household marked by multiple wives and a strict adherence to unconventional doctrines. Alma Dayer LeBaron, who himself had ambitions of leading a religious movement, instilled in Ervil a deep sense of devotion to the tenets of Mormon fundamentalism. The family's frequent moves between Mexico and the United States in pursuit of stability exposed Ervil to the challenges and hardships that would later contribute to the formation of his radical beliefs. As a young man, Ervil exhibited a charming aura and a profound commitment to the religious teachings of his father. These qualities would eventually propel him into a position of leadership within the Mormon fundamentalist movement.
Who is he and why should we even care?
Ervil LeBaron, self-styled prophet and patriarch.
The formation of the LeBaron Group. In 1955, Ervil LeBaron founded the Church of the Firstborn of the Fullness of Times, a pivotal moment that marked the genesis of the LeBaron Group. As the self-proclaimed prophet and leader, Ervil crafted a doctrine that deviated significantly from mainstream Mormonism, embracing polygamy as a central tenet.
My mom had 12 children, 7 of them with Ervil.
Polygamy within the LeBaron group was not merely a religious practice, but a mechanism of control, strategically employed by Ervil to consolidate loyalty among his followers.
Ervil says, okay, I'll give you 2 other wives, and I'll give them to you for wives because I took your wife.
The group's expansion saw an increase in internal power struggles as ambitious leaders sought to challenge Ervil's authority, setting the stage for a descent into violence. LeBaron twisted the controversial Mormon concept of blood atonement to justify murder as a divine command.
Some of your husbands, if they don't start getting behind me and doing what they should and paying their tithing, they are going to be pushing up carrots in the garden.
According to his interpretation, death was the only way to atone for certain sins or disobedience against his authority.
It blows my mind. I sit and think, this is impossible. And yet it did happen.
Ruthless pursuit of power. The 1970s and 80s witnessed a dark chapter in the history of the LeBaron group, marked by a series of violent acts orchestrated under Ervil's leadership.
Joel F. LeBaron was attacked in an empty home, hit over the bridge of the nose with a chair leg.
The murder of Joel LeBaron, Ervil LeBaron's own brother, is a grim chapter in the history of the LeBaron group. In 1972, internal power struggles and religious disputes within the group culminated in Joel's assassination, orchestrated by Ervil. The motive behind the murder was rooted in a struggle for control over the Church of the Firstborn of the Fullness of Times. Ervil was tried and convicted for planning the murder, but his conviction was later overturned on a technicality.
Bribery was a big thing in Mexico. It was a way of life, and Uncle Ervil played that well. He hadn't grown up knowing how to manipulate and bribe people.
Ervil's ruthlessness didn't end with Joel's murder. He also orchestrated the attempted murder of another brother, Verlin LeBaron, who had separated from the church. Verlin survived the attack, but suffered serious injuries. This again led to Ervil's arrest, but this time he was released due to lack of evidence. The murder in 1977 of Rulon C. Allred, a prominent leader of another Mormon fundamentalist sect, also served as a gruesome testament to Ervil's unbridled ruthlessness.
That this man was leading his people astray, and God wanted him out of the way.
The motivation behind Allred's murder was rooted in religious rivalry and the quest for dominance within the broader context of Mormon fundamentalism.
My father was a very respected, influential person and had a huge following, and Ervil wanted that.
Ervil perceived Allred as a threat to his leadership and sought to eliminate him. He was also linked to the murders of people within his own circle who criticized him or wanted to leave the group, including his own pregnant teenage daughter, Rebecca. The crimes committed by the LeBaron group drew the attention of law enforcement agencies, leading to a manhunt for Ervil.
The FBI puts him on the top of the 10 most wanted list.
In 1979, he was arrested in Mexico and subsequently extradited to the United States to face charges related to the murders. The trial that followed provided a harrowing glimpse into the inner workings of the LeBaron group.
And I remember Ervil picking me up in the audience with his eyes. And we stared at each other for 2 minutes.
Testimonies revealed the extent of religious fanaticism and illegal activities, painting a picture of a captivating leader who manipulated his followers to perform unspeakable violent behavior in the name of twisted religious beliefs. Ervil LeBaron faced multiple convictions, including conspiracy to commit murder, resulting in a lengthy prison sentence. The legal proceedings not only held Ervil accountable for the actions committed under his leadership, but also exposed the inner workings of the LeBaron group.
How glad we all were that this chapter of our lives could be partly closed.
Ervil is sentenced to life in prison.
As he began serving his sentence, Ervil's influence over the group persisted, even from behind bars. The LeBaron group, now fractured and divided, continued their violence and intimidation tactics in a chilling testament to the enduring impact of religious extremism.
Ervil had ordered his followers to come bust him out of maximum security prison.
Death and legacy. Ervil LeBaron died in prison on August 15, 1981, leaving behind a legacy of terror. His life's trajectory, from a devout upbringing in a polygamous Mormon family to the orchestrator of brutal crimes, remains a haunting example of the dangers posed by magnetic leaders who exploit religious fervor for personal gain.
the daughter of the man he was convicted of killing, said his death alone in a jail cell was a fitting end.
But the LeBaron Group, despite Ervil's death, did not fade into obscurity. The fractures within the organization gave rise to splinter groups, each grappling with the aftermath of the vicious legacy left by their founder. Family members and followers struggled to reconcile their beliefs with the brutal acts committed in the name of faith. In the years following Ervil's death, some former members sought to distance themselves from the group's past, while others perpetuated the cycle of extremism.
This was an incredibly fearful time.
The LeBaron name became synonymous not only with religious fanaticism, but also with a family and community torn apart by internal strife and the repercussions of their leaders' actions.
It's not a matter of if the killing's going to go on, but just simply when.
The 4 o'clock murders. The 4 o'clock murders were orchestrated by members of the LeBaron Group following the order set by Ervil LeBaron in writings before his death in 1981. These killings were part of a series committed by the group as they sought to eliminate perceived rivals and consolidate power. A group of armed individuals affiliated with the LeBaron sect descended on a community in Sonora, Mexico. The targets were individuals whom the group considered enemies. 4 simultaneous killings took place in different states at the same hour, as ordered in a manifesto written by Ervil before his death. The motivation behind the 4 o'clock murders was deeply rooted in the group's distorted sense of religious duty and a desire to eliminate those they perceived as threats to their interpretation of Mormon fundamentalism.
Some people close to that sect would say that on June 27th, they were punished for their sin.
After they had interviewed the Shanoth family, there were people that they suspected of being involved.
The harsh nature of the attack shocked the surrounding communities and law enforcement, leaving a lasting scar on the history of the LeBaron Group. Legacy and impact. Ervil LeBaron's legacy extends beyond the confines of his criminal activities. His influence, both during his life and after his death, continues to be felt within the broader landscape of Mormon fundamentalism.
When you read his writings, you would understand that these are not the writings of a man who is in his right mind.
We didn't know that our father was mentally ill for his whole life. It wasn't until our father had been in prison and we began to notice, or the adults began to notice, that his revelations and his orders were becoming more and more bizarre.
The Mormon fundamentalist movement, which already existed on the fringes of mainstream Mormonism, faced increased scrutiny and skepticism in the wake of the LeBaron Group's savage acts. Questions arose about the responsibility of religious communities to prevent the rise of alluring leaders who exploit faith for personal gain. His legacy is one of fear and paranoia. The possibility of secret followers enacting his vendettas long after his death led to persistent unease among former members and enemies.
Watching it now, it's just horrifying how much violence there was in our family history.
Just heart-wrenching to see, because they're representing people that I love. So it's hard to see what they've done with their lives.
The thing is that they were just brainwashed. And when you take away that brainwashing, we were always good people.
Deprogramming became necessary for many who escaped his influence, and the authorities remained vigilant against the potential threat of further violence from his adherents. The media drew comparisons between Ervil LeBaron and Charles Manson. Both men used their charismatic influence to incite their followers to commit murder, and both left a lasting impact on American consciousness.
He never dirtied his hands, never bloodied his hands, but he was able to compel them to go carry out that kind of handiwork.
What do you think was the most chilling aspect of Ervil LeBaron's life?
As long as that doggone book's out there, the Book of the Covenant, there's always a potential for someone to pick it up and say, I'm the one mighty and strong now. And that should be a concern to everyone.
Okay, ready for more bone-chilling true events? Because we got one for you. It's all about the notorious Boston Strangler.
The city is for some glamorous, stimulating, prosperous. Only recently has it become dangerous.
Welcome to Watch Mojo, and today we're discussing the shocking true story of the Boston Strangler.
The crimes themselves are insane.
He ransacks the apartments but doesn't take anything.
For this video, we're looking at the real events that inspired Hulu's latest crime thriller, Boston Strangler. Albert DeSalvo. Albert Henry DeSalvo was born in Chelsea, Massachusetts on September 3, 1931. His childhood was filled with violence, beginning with physical abuse from his father Frank, who was a misuser of alcohol. The young DeSalvo frequently witnessed his father beat his mother and hire sex workers. In one particularly heinous incident, Frank knocked out his wife's teeth and broke all of her fingers.
Soon after that incident, Charlotte and Frank divorced. The family never saw Frank again.
DeSalvo started committing crimes at a young age. After being arrested for battery and robbery at 12, he was sent to the Lyman School for Boys. He was paroled after a year, but stole a car and ended up back at reform school. In 1948, a 17-year-old DeSalvo enlisted in the U.S. Army.
There, he really found himself. He was always a hard worker.
When he was stationed in Germany, he met and married Irmgard Beck. The couple moved back to the States, settling down in New Jersey. In 1955, DeSalvo was accused of abusing a girl in her home, but the charges were dropped. He was honorably discharged for the second time and eventually moved to Massachusetts.
DeSalvo was discharged from the army and returned to Boston with his wife to start a family.
Around this time, a series of sex-related crimes were reported by women who said a man pretending to work for a modeling agency came to their homes and took their measurements.
He would ask that she don a leotard so that he could take her measurements, which were, in those days, very much a part of the hoorah, suggesting an attractive woman.
In March 1960, DeSalvo was arrested for breaking and entering a woman's home and shocked the police by confessing to be the measurement man.
DeSalvo was diagnosed a sociopath and sent to prison.
He was released from jail after serving 11 months of his 18-month sentence. DeSalvo then began another crime spree.
His sentence was just 11 months. In April 1962, Albert was once again a free man.
The Silk Stocking Murders. From June 1962 to January 1964, 13 women in and around Boston, Massachusetts were killed in their homes. Almost all of the victims were sexually assaulted and strangled, most using their own nylon stockings. The first was 56-year-old seamstress Anna Sleezers, who was found dead in her Boston apartment on June 14, 1962. The killer had strangled her with the belt on her bathrobe, foreshadowing his signature MO. 5 elderly victims followed in late June and August. 85-year-old Mary Mullen died of a heart attack while being attacked. Physiotherapist Nina Nichols and nurse Helen Blake were strangled with their own nylon stockings. The bodies of Beacon Hill resident Ida Erga and night nurse Jane Sullivan were discovered just days apart.
It really began to drift like a fog over the city that we had a killer loose in Boston.
In December, there was an apparent change in the killer's victimology when Sophie Clark was found on the 5th and Patricia Bissett on New Year's Eve. Both were students in their 20s, and Clark was African American, a significant deviation from elderly Caucasian women.
She just didn't move, and I was really panicked and shocked, and I called out her name, and I said, "Oh, God."
As Boston residents realized that any woman could be the next victim, there was an increase in sales of alarm systems, deadbolt locks, guns, and guard dogs.
Everyone got guns, weapons, locks on houses, alarm systems. There was a genuine terror in the city.
Also during this time, Boston Record American reporters Loretta McLaughlin and Jean Cole took it upon themselves to conduct their own investigation into the elusive killer, whom they dubbed the Boston Strangler. The murders continued the following year, although they were more spread out. On March 6th, 69-year-old Mary Brown was discovered in her Lawrence, Massachusetts residence. Like most of the other victims, she had been sexually assaulted and strangled with stockings, but also stabbed. Boston University grad student Beverly Sammons, another young woman in her 20s, was found with stockings and scarves knotted around her neck, but it was determined that she had been stabbed to death.
As the number of victims grew, police became more and more frustrated. No woman felt safe.
2 more murders occurred before the end of the year. The body of 58-year-old Mary Corbin was found by a friend on September 8th. And on November 23rd, 22-year-old Sunday school teacher Joanne Graff was found after she wasn't seen for days and friends called the police. On January 4th, 1964, the final, as well as the youngest victim, 19-year-old Mary Sullivan, was found by her roommates.
Months went by. There were no more stranglings. There was all kinds of speculation. Had he died? Had he been arrested? Had he moved out of the state? Was he in another country?
The Green Man confesses. Throughout the investigation, police reportedly interviewed thousands of suspects. But the man who wasn't on their radar was Albert DeSalvo. He was arrested, however, in October 1964 after matching the description of a man who reportedly restrained and sexually assaulted a woman in her home before suddenly apologizing and fleeing. He admitted to the Green Man crimes, a string of sexual assaults throughout New England.
Police estimated that DeSalvo, as the Green Man, may have committed hundreds of assaults.
DeSalvo was sent to Bridgewater State Hospital for psychiatric assessment, where he met convicted murderer George Nassar and allegedly confessed to being the Boston Strangler. Nassar shared the shocking confession with his lawyer F. Lee Bailey, who decided to represent DeSalvo. DeSalvo formally confessed, revealing intimate knowledge of the crimes.
Bailey checked Albert's answers with the Boston police, who told him Albert had passed the test with flying colors.
But there was no physical evidence tying him to the crime scenes. He was never charged with the murders, instead receiving a life sentence for the Green Man assaults.
But there was no physical evidence linking DeSalvo to the crimes. And defense lawyer Bailey had secured a commitment that the confessions could not be used against him in court.
In February 1967, he and 2 other inmates escaped, but he turned himself in after 3 days of freedom.
I asked him his name, he said it was DeSalvo, and I put the cuffs on him.
He was then transferred to Walpole State Prison to finish serving his life sentence. But in November 1973, he was stabbed to death by another prisoner. 2 men, Richard Devlin and Robert Wilson, were charged and tried for his murder, but the trial ended with a deadlocked jury.
No one was ever convicted of his murder.
A break in the case. In the early 2000s, Mary Sullivan's sister Diane and DeSalvo's brother Richard worked together to get the case reopened, since neither of them believed Albert was the strangler.
I think Albert confessed, solely had to do it with money.
However, the Sullivan and DeSalvo families wouldn't get any answers until July 2013, when Boston law enforcement officials announced they were able to establish a connection using DNA evidence. After exhuming DeSalvo's remains and using his nephew's DNA for a familial match, it was confirmed that DeSalvo's seminal fluid was at the Sullivan crime scene.
From that, a DNA match was made for the first time, confirming Albert DeSalvo as Sullivan's killer with 99.9% certainty. News that Mary Sullivan's family had waited decades to hear.
I've lived with Mary's memory every day, my whole life. And it's amazing to me today to understand that people really did care about what happened to my aunt.
Many experts, officers, authors, and relatives still have their doubts over whether DeSalvo killed all the victims attributed to the Strangler. The inconsistent victimology that crosses age and racial lines was considered unusual and unlikely. Others have argued that DeSalvo was incorrect about some details of the crimes, like the time and killing methods.
It is very interesting to me that Albert's confession reproduces the misinformation that appeared in the newspapers. For example, he grossly mistook the time of day that one of the murders was committed. He was mistaken about the type of weapon in another case.
The police had agreed not to use DeSalvo's confessions as evidence against him, and they'd been unable to corroborate Albert's admissions with physical evidence.
Nassar, the man DeSalvo confessed to, has also been suspected of being the Strangler. Some have theorized that he had promised to split the reward money with DeSalvo, which DeSalvo may have intended for his wife and 2 children. Or that DeSalvo just really wanted to be famous.
He wanted to be world-renowned. And of course, if you confess to the worst serial murder since Jack the Ripper, you're going to be famous, infamous. Another reason that he had was that someone convinced him that if he confessed to being the Boston Strangler, he could make it a lot of money.
In the media, over the past 5 decades, a number of books, movies, TV specials, and podcasts have covered the case of the notorious Boston Strangler. fictional characters have been based on DeSalvo and his alleged crimes, including multiple serial killers on Criminal Minds. In 1968, only 1 year after his sentencing, Tony Curtis starred as DeSalvo in Richard Fleischer's film The Boston Strangler, which earned the actor a Golden Globe nomination.
I must be losing my marbles.
You're not, Albert. But you know now there's something wrong, don't you? Will you admit that to me?
Yeah, something. All right. Something.
On March 17, 2023, Hulu is releasing Boston Strangler, a film about the infamous crimes told from the point of view of the tenacious journalists who were reporting on the case. Keira Knightley and Carrie Coon star as Loretta McLaughlin and Jean Cole, respectively, with David Dastmalchian taking on the role of Albert DeSalvo.
Boston police, hands on the wall.
We had him. We just let him walk away.
Everything lines up with him. His history, the progression of the crimes, everything.
You know how many people I've gone down the rabbit hole with? It's a dead end every time with this case.
Our next video is likely to shock you, creep you out, and intrigue you all at the same time. That's because it's about the very strange circumstances surrounding Natalia Grace.
I still don't have concrete answers.
Somebody's not telling the truth.
Welcome to WatchMojo, and today we're looking at the facts, accusations, and theories surrounding Natalia Grace.
I want you to know how old I am. I want you to know about my past because I want to know too.
There are two sides to every story. In the case of Natalia Grace, though, people have gone back and forth between who's lying, who's telling the truth, and whether one person is being 100% honest.
You want to have me give you one word that describes Natalia to me? Enigma.
While investigators have been able to pin down some facts, much of this story boils down to she said, they said. Natalia Grace is either a monster or a victim depending on who you ask. The answer may never be clear-cut, but everyone can agree on one thing. This is among the most fascinating and unsettling stories to grace the true crime scene in some time.
You've adopted a kid and now they're trying to kill you. I mean, it's the stuff of a horror movie, right?
Natalia's adoption and abandonment. Natalia Grace was born in Ukraine with spondyloepiphyseal dysplasia congenita, an uncommon bone growth disorder. Spending much of her childhood in a Ukraine orphanage, Natalia was eventually adopted by Michael and Christine Barnett.
We're overcome with joy and emotion. Oh my gosh, that day in and of itself, without context, is one of the 5 greatest days of my life.
This wealthy Indiana couple already had 3 sons. Their eldest, Jacob, has autism, inspiring his mother to create a nonprofit special needs learning center.
The Barnett family opened up a foundation, a place where parents and kids with autism could go be with other parents and kids with autism and feel normal.
Jacob was also the subject of Christine Barnett's book, The Spark, a mother's story of nurturing, genius, and autism. Looking to adopt another child, the Barnetts received a call about Natalia in 2010. Given a 24-hour window, the Barnetts flew to Florida and formally made Natalia a part of the family. The Barnetts celebrated with a trip to Disney World, but things soon took a hairy turn.
We went with Natalia to Disney World. We were all excited to have her in the family, and Natalia seemed happy to join our family.
At the hotel, Christine prepared to give Natalia a bath.
Christine's going to give our brand new daughter a bath, and I hear a shout from the bathroom. This was a, I'm not playing around, come here right now, Michael.
Although Natalia was said to be roughly around 6 or 7, Christine claimed that she found hair in areas that normally wouldn't see development for at least a few more years. This wasn't the last time the Barnetts cast doubt surrounding Natalia's age. The Barnetts allegedly discovered signs of menstruation and found that Natalia was much taller than another girl with the same form of dwarfism.
There's no way anybody could look at this picture and say those two are the same age.
Even more concerning, the couple believed that Natalia was attempting to harm the family, claiming that she put pledge in Christine's coffee, hid knives in her room, and attempted to push Christine into an electric fence at a farm.
Christine screaming at them, she needs to be arrested, she tried to kill me, she needs to be arrested, she tried to kill me.
We wanted charges. We wanted her arrested.
These were supposedly enforced by verbal death threats. If you're thinking, This sounds exactly like the 2009 horror film Orphan. You're not the only one to draw that parallel. Making Natalia out to be a sociopath, the Barnetts placed her in a mental health hospital.
We had been trying to get her to inpatient treatment. We had been begging people to help us. We had been told by everybody, you need help desperately. Your family's in danger. She needs inpatient treatment.
Although Natalia wasn't deemed mentally unstable, some did question her age with accusations of her, quote, propositioning men. Around the same time that Natalia was in the hospital, her adoptive parents petitioned successfully to have her legally re-aged from 8 to 22.
They give her a new birth certificate with a new birth date. They gave her a new Indiana ID. She has, everything changes from a year of birth of 2003, back it up 14 years to 1989.
Shortly after Natalia's release, the Barnetts sent her to live in a Westfield apartment. She was later moved to a Lafayette apartment while her adoptive family uprooted to Canada.
2013, the Perimeter Institute in Waterloo, Ontario, Canada, wants Jacob, who's 14, to go there to get his master's degree. So we're moving to Canada.
Natalia would be taken in by Antoine and Cynthia Manns, who were skeptical of the Barnetts' claims and actions. Who's the true victim and monster? Natalia has denied the accusations against her, swearing that she was the one being abused.
That whole thing was just a big chain reaction from one lie. But people don't know what happened in that house.
According to Natalia, Christine was the primary source of torment, inflicting physical harm and attempting to set her up with older men. Natalia further claims that Christine pressured her to lie about her age, among other things. Jacob Barnett was supposedly instructed by his mother to kick Natalia down the stairs.
It's okay. I feel like I deserve the right to tell my story. I did not tell them that. I didn't tell them about kicking the stairs.
Well, kicking down the stairs, we said we're not going to say, right?
Although Natalia says that Michael didn't participate in the beatings, she blames him for not stopping Christine. Although Michael has spoken ill of his adoptive daughter in the past, he's since had a change of tune, arguing that Christine abused Natalia and himself. In any case, Natalia believes that Michael still played a major role in her abandonment.
Christine is the real monster. Michael is an accomplice to the monster because he went along with everything that Christine said.
Michael filed for divorce in 2014, with his marriage to Christine officially ending in 2018. The following year, Michael and Christine were charged with child neglect.
Prior to this, the Barnetts were on the cover of magazines and newspapers. And now, after being arrested and charged, being photographed for a whole different reason.
A jury found Michael not guilty after roughly 2 hours of deliberation, although some key details were excluded from the trial, namely Natalia's age when the Barnetts abandoned her. It had been determined that Natalia's biological mother was Anna Volodymyrivna Gava, who was born in 1979.
The DNA test results came back. It is a match. She is indeed Natalia's biological mother. This is a huge deal and may put this whole age issue to rest.
When the Barnetts had Natalia re-aged, her birth year was changed to 1989, which would have made Gava a 10-year-old at the time. It seemed more likely that Natalia was born on September 4th, 2003, as her original records indicated.
4 сентября родилась, в 2003 году, в 6:25 родилась в первом роддоме.
Nevertheless, the charges against Christine were dropped due to a lack of evidence. In August 2023, a DNA test found that Natalia was roughly around 20. Thus, she would have been around 9 when the Barnetts put her in an apartment.
It's clear that the prosecution believes Natalia was a child when she was left alone to fend for herself in this apartment in Lafayette, Indiana. Getting her re-aged to an adult could have been a way for Michael and Christine to protect themselves from child neglect charges.
This seems to conclude once and for all that Natalia wasn't an adult pretending to be a child. What remains up for debate is whether Natalia was ever violent towards the Barnetts. Natalia and Michael have since come together, agreeing that Christine put them both through hell.
I'm overly sorry about what she did to you. I am horrified by what she has done to you.
I am sorry I wasn't stronger and didn't stop her.
They also denied Christine's allegations that there was a sexual relationship between them. Although Natalia forgave Michael, she still believes that he holds some accountability.
Michael, I forgive you.
You don't have to. I don't forgive me.
You should.
Natalia is especially suspicious of whose idea it was to re-age her, a subject that Michael refuses to talk about. As for why the Barnetts adopted Natalia in the first place, it's been theorized that Christine wanted to exploit and profit off her.
I feel like it was a mission of like boosting her ego type of thing. I feel like she just wanted people to be like, oh my goodness, like, she's this amazing person. She just adopted a little girl from the Ukraine who has dwarfism.
When that didn't go according to plan, they sought to distance themselves from Natalia. Cynthia Mans even suspects that Christine took direct inspiration from the movie Orphan in an attempt to paint Natalia as a monster.
It was all copied off the movie Orphan. Ukrainian girl, Russian girl, check. Orphan, check. All this crazy stuff. Standing at the end of the bed with a knife. Check. That's why I want to do this. That's why I want to tell people what really happened, because I didn't get that chance. Michael and Christine are painting me as this homicidal maniac. She was eating her period and she hid it for this long. And having pubic hair at 7 years old, like, don't trust her. Don't believe anything she says. She's trying to murder my family.
After serving as her guardians for a decade, Antoine and Cynthia Mans officially adopted Natalia in June 2023. Assuming that Natalia really was an innocent victim, this might seem like the happiest ending possible.
With this adoption, I'll be legally a part of the family, so that way I'll be protected while I do civil suits against the Barnetts. You know, abuse, neglect, and a whole bunch of other stuff that should not have happened.
There's just one more revelation that has given people pause. Who is Natalia Grace? Natalia Grace has presented her side of the story on Dr. Phil and the docuseries The Curious Case of Natalia Grace. Both make Natalia out to be a more sympathetic figure than the Barnetts implied.
I had to learn a lot of life lessons at an early age. But I will forever embrace my past because I feel like it made me stronger. I just want to stay focused on now because I have a lot of big plans for my life.
However, the Investigation Discovery series ends its second season on a note that throws everything into question. In a phone conversation, Antoine and Cynthia Mans are heard accusing Natalia of lying, backstabbing, and only caring about herself.
She's done other things too, but this was a new low. Natalia does not have emotions for nothing but herself.
While the docuseries exists to inform, its goal above all else is to entertain. For all we know, this phone call could have been taken out of context to hook us in for a potential third season. That said, we're not sure how else to interpret this bombshell as of writing.
We're done. We're done with it.
Following the season 2 finale, Natalia posted on social media that she was, quote, doing well, but couldn't elaborate because she, quote, signed an agreement with the show to keep things confidential for now. This won't be the last we hear from Natalia Grace.
I just want to stay focused on now because I have a lot of big plans for my life. I'm going to get my age changed back to the way it's supposed to be. Go to school, get my high school diploma.
While a third season of the docuseries has yet to be announced, the showrunners have set viewers up for more. Natalia's story will also be dramatized in a Hulu limited series starring Ellen Pompeo. By that point, perhaps we'll have a clearer answer of who Natalia Grace is.
This is a new chapter in the story with just endless possibilities.
Until then, she remains something of a mystery. Maybe this is due to limited information and conflicting accounts. Depending on how much the media truly knows, though, Natalia might be an enigma by design.
Book 2 is about to be written by me. And that book is going to be an amazing book. I already know.
your thoughts on the Natalia Grace case?
This was hard, but I'm willing to do it because everybody deserves a second chance. Everybody deserves a time to admit their faults and be forgiven.
I appreciate that. I hope you have nothing but a happy existence, and it seems like you have that.
I am okay.
All right, our last shocking story today centers on controversial figure Gypsy Rose Blanchard. And trust me, it's quite the doozy.
But there was still a point that she didn't have to die, and I wish I could have stopped it.
Welcome to Watch Mojo, and today we're discussing the life of Gypsy Rose Blanchard, from her disturbing upbringing to her jaw-dropping arrest to her recent release from prison.
This is really hard to talk about because it took me down a really dark path.
Dee Dee and Gypsy together forever. Gypsy Rose was born to Rod and Claudine Dee Dee Blanchard on July 27, 1991.
Gypsy was born. She was a cute little baby, you know. She was tiny, but healthy and happy. She really looked like me.
Of course, Gypsy's exact birthday would become a subject of debate as she progressed in age. The 17-year-old Rod felt obligated to marry the 24-year-old Dee Dee when she became pregnant.
She got pregnant. And being from the South, I guess, I was raised where, you know, you got a girl pregnant and, you know, you got married. There was no other question about what you did.
It didn't take long for Rod to sense that something was off about his new bride, who expressed interest in witchcraft. He wasn't the first one to become wary of Dee Dee. Her family has accused Dee Dee of stealing and possibly starving her mother to death.
I asked her sister, you know, I was like, I hate to ask this, but you think Dee Dee had anything to do with her mom's death? And she, you know, said, now I wonder. That's how evil she was.
With Rod realizing he didn't love Dee Dee, the marriage ended before Gypsy's birth. While Rod didn't immediately exit the picture, distance grew as Dee Dee consumed her daughter's life. From the get-go, Dee Dee insisted that Gypsy suffered from various health problems, including sleep apnea, chromosomal abnormality, and muscular dystrophy.
I remember when Gypsy was 3 or 4 months old, Dee Dee told me she would like stop breathing in her sleep. She had her tested and she has sleep apnea.
It wouldn't be until much later that people realized Dee Dee was the one in need of medical treatment, showing clear signs of Munchausen syndrome by proxy.
When you look at Munchausen's by proxy, you often see that there was an encounter to address a real need with the child. But in doing so, Dee Dee gained attention from having a child that could go blind.
A turning point came when Gypsy was around 7 or 8. Getting into a motorcycle accident with her grandfather. It wasn't a serious crash, with Gypsy only enduring a scraped knee. But Dee Dee convinced the doctors to supply a wheelchair that her daughter started to use.
I didn't understand her reasonings, but I trusted her. She was my best friend, and I loved her. And I never questioned as a child.
Dee Dee wasn't the only family member mistreating Gypsy, who accused her grandfather of indecent assault. Rod was never abusive, although Dee Dee led Gypsy and others to believe otherwise. Rod was pushed further away as Dee Dee moved with Gypsy to New Orleans. Dee Dee's relationship with her family had also grown strained, with accusations of poisoning her stepmother.
She was putting some poison in my food, the same thing she had put in the plant.
And she wound up, she stayed 9 months in bed. After that, she couldn't get up. I didn't think she was going to make it.
While Rod continued to support Dee Dee financially, he remained oblivious to her faking Gypsy's illnesses. Although doctors found nothing wrong with Gypsy, Dee Dee regularly subjected her to ER visits and surgeries, most notably receiving a feeding tube.
We find feeding tubes such a common aspect of Munchausen syndrome by proxy because a feeding tube gives a parent almost unlimited control.
Dee Dee pumped her daughter full of unnecessary medications, causing Gypsy to develop a substance use disorder. Leukemia, asthma, and seizures are just some of the other conditions that Dee Dee claimed to be ailing Gypsy.
Dee Dee was pretty clear that Gypsy had a history of cancer, asthma, some sort of muscular disorder.
Aside from a slight lazy eye, though, there was little wrong with Gypsy, who trusted her mother nonetheless. Hurricane Katrina left Dee Dee and Gypsy without a home. Conveniently for Dee Dee, Gypsy's medical records and birth certificate were lost.
Dee Dee didn't have the medical records. She said they're gone because it was chaos down in New Orleans right after Katrina. So Dee Dee became the sole place for information.
The two eventually relocated to Springfield, Missouri, where Habitat for Humanity built them a home. Dee Dee deceived several other high-profile organizations, including Ronald McDonald House Charities and the Make-A-Wish Foundation. Dee Dee lied about Gypsy's age and mental growth as well, a delusion supported by her height, lack of teeth, and high-pitched voice.
The way that Gypsy acted, wearing princess dresses, the way she talked, the things that she referenced that she liked to do, were like a kindergartner.
Although Rod attempted to reach out with his new wife, Christy, Dee Dee kept them away and in the dark. Among the few who suspected something to be off was Dr. Bernardo Flasterstein, but there wasn't enough evidence to get social services involved.
I've been asked many times, why didn't I report it to family services? You cannot call family service for a suspicion. You have to have it proven that the mom is making it up.
Gypsy would take matters into her own hands. An imperfect murder. Slowly but surely, Gypsy came to accept that her caregiver was lying about her health and age. When Gypsy was 19, not 15 as her mother claimed, she attempted to run away with a guy named Dan, whom she met at a sci-fi convention.
We both went to this sci-fi fantasy convention called VisionCon. I had told him vaguely about what was going on at home. And he told me, you just pack your stuff and you can come live with me.
It didn't take long for Dee Dee to track down Gypsy, convincing her to come home. Upon returning, Dee Dee destroyed Gypsy's computer and phone before handcuffing and leashing her to a bed for 2 weeks.
She took me back home and smashed my computer with a hammer, smashed my cell phone with a hammer, and said, if you ever try to do that again, I'm gonna smash your fingers with a hammer.
Dee Dee buried photos of Gypsy and Dan in a mason jar along with a cow tongue and her daughter's period blood. Putting a hex on Gypsy, Dee Dee allegedly told her, quote, "You will never find love. You will never be happy."
I just think it's true because it's like every time I get close to someone, they leave me.
Struggling to escape, Gypsy saw murder as the only way out. Gypsy recalls attempting to shoot her mother, but she didn't realize until after pulling the trigger that it was just a BB gun. Unable to do the deed herself, Gypsy turned to her boyfriend, Nicholas Godejean. Gypsy met Godejean online, coming to view him as her Prince Charming.
2 weeks after first communicating, did we make it official on Facebook that we're in a relationship. And again, I was in that mindset that, oh, this is my knight in shining armor.
An ex-girlfriend of Godejean attempted to warn Gypsy otherwise. There were other warning signs, such as Godejean's dark fantasies and claims of having a murderous alternate personality.
His multiple personalities would come out, and he had talked to me one day, and he was just like, I would like my other personalities to have a girlfriend.
Regardless, Gypsy attempted to introduce Godejean to her mother at a 2015 screening of Cinderella. Dee Dee wanted nothing to do with Godejean, who claims that he had sex with Gypsy in the theater bathroom.
She despised him. She was like, he's creepy, he's weird, he's coming to see a kid's movie alone by himself. And now looking back on it, yeah, it is weird.
Godejean agreed to murder Dee Dee with a knife that Gypsy stole from a Walmart. Gypsy would make a video instructing Godejean on how to commit the murder.
I made a video for Nick that's kind of like a walkthrough of what the house layout looked like.
One night in June 2015, Gypsy professed her love to her mother before bed. After Godejean arrived via taxi, Gypsy curled up in the bathroom while her boyfriend stabbed Dee Dee 17 times.
There was one sharp scream and then it was over. It was silence. I didn't hear anything.
Godejean wanted to fulfill a depraved sexual fantasy with Dee Dee before murdering her. Gypsy convinced him not to, suggesting that they have sex instead. Although the two subsequently engaged in intercourse, Gypsy didn't view it as consensual. They fled to Godejean's home in Wisconsin via bus, mailing the murder weapon to his family's house.
I'm in a state of shock where I didn't believe any of that happened. That was my frame of mind.
In addition to being spotted by numerous witnesses, Gypsy made the misguided decision to post about the crime on Facebook.
Startlingly, it was Gypsy who went online to announce, that bitch is dead.
Dee Dee's body was discovered about 5 days after the murder, with the authorities soon tracing the Facebook post's IP address to Godejean's house, where the runaway couple was arrested.
I panic. I'm like, oh, like, what are we gonna do?
As neighbors mourned Dee Dee and feared for Gypsy's life, the police uncovered the truth. Seeing Gypsy walk into a courtroom, everything the public thought they knew about the Blanchards unraveled.
You can see Gypsy for yourself walking into court.
It was like a chill went down your spine. There was a collective gasp or collective like, whoa!
Gypsy, you're free. Although many would call this premeditated murder, the case was anything but conventional.
I felt in my heart just this overwhelming sadness and guilt and being ashamed of the actions that I took to make this be a reality.
As such, the prosecution chose not to pursue the death penalty. It was also decided that Godejean and Gypsy should be tried separately, since the latter had been abused for most of her life. As part of Godejean's defense at trial, his lawyers cited his low average IQ, autism, and extreme love for Gypsy as reasons for his actions. It didn't work. Godejean received a life sentence, while Gypsy was sentenced to 10 years after taking a plea bargain.
How do you plead to the Class A felony of murder in the second degree?
Guilty.
The court finds that there is a factual basis for a plea of guilty. Court accepts defendant's plea of guilty and finds defendant guilty thereof beyond a reasonable doubt.
Gypsy went from one prison to another, with her substance use disorder escalating. Yet Gypsy described her first day in prison as her, quote, best memory, finally feeling free from her mother's grasp.
I'm free. I'm free to have friends. I'm free to do what I want. I might be in a controlled environment, but this is nice.
Since then, Gypsy has reconnected with her father while forming new relationships. Gypsy became engaged to a man named Ken after he watched the documentary Mommy, Dead and Dearest. Their engagement crumbled once Gypsy's story was dramatized in the Emmy-winning miniseries The Act.
That girl, she is stronger than she looks. I'm lucky to be her mom. I was born to be her mom.
And are you excited to be here and make new friends, Gypsy?
You bet
yes.
she is.
Gypsy has yet to see the show, which she didn't consult on or receive payment for. The act led to Gypsy blowing up on social media, bringing unwanted attention that Ken couldn't handle. Gypsy found another fiancé in a Louisiana teacher named Ryan Scott Anderson.
We had this connection that it seemed so seamless, so easy. This is something I never thought that I would have after everything that has happened.
The two almost called it off after Anderson learned that Gypsy had lied about still being in contact with Ken. The couple nevertheless tied the knot on June 27, 2022, although they considered getting an annulment following an argument. They've since decided to work through their differences.
The man I came to call my best friend, I now call husband. With all that life has to offer us, I vow to be yours. I love you with all of my heart and soul. Your wife, Gypsy Rose Anderson.
Godejean's legal team is currently seeking a new appeal. Meanwhile, Gypsy was released on December 28, 2023, being paroled after serving 8 years.
The car is moving. Oh my God.
Yeah, baby, we're out. We're out.
Oh, it feels so weird being in a car.
She's opened up through her book, Conversations on the Eve of Freedom, and gained a substantial online following. In an era dominated by true crime content, Gypsy's story is one that's kept the public coming back for nearly a decade.
You're trending on TikTok, people saying things like, I'm tipsy for Gypsy. How do you explain this?
I honestly, I don't know myself. I consider myself just a normal woman, but I think maybe my story resonates with a lot of people.
Her allure bolstered by documentaries and by Hollywood, portrayed in Hulu's award-winning miniseries, The Act.
My mom is my best friend. All she wants to do is keep me safe.
Gypsy! So many people are embracing you out there. Do you feel any conflict with that? You've got fame, even though you participated in a murder?
Of course I feel conflicted. Fame is not what I'm looking for.
Part of that's because of how many people the mother-daughter pair fooled, how long their ruse lasted, and how their relationship ultimately exploded. Gypsy's story didn't end there, and it's still unfolding.
I share my story to be a cautionary tale so that the next person that might be in a situation like mine where they are in an abusive relationship or they are feeling trapped, they don't take the route that I did.
Are we still on?
As Gypsy learned the hard way, there are no fairy tale endings. On the heels of abuse, murder, and incarceration, though, has the 32-year-old Gypsy Rose Blanchard reached a point of closure? What do you think is next for Gypsy Rose Blanchard?
All I can do is be myself, put myself out there and in the truest form. I'm not setting out to manipulate anyone. I'm just myself.
All right, well, that's going to do it for this riveting look at shocking true stories. Thanks for watching, everybody. I've been Matt from Watch Mojo, and I'll see you next time.